So now we have Matt Siegel presenting on minding time. Chronos, Kairos, and Aion in an archetypal cosmos. Please welcome Matt.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's that? Probably hear me anyways. So, title is Minding Time, Chronos, Kairos, and Aion. You'll notice on the pamphlet that we handed out that I added another kind of time, which I discovered 2 days ago. Greek is great like that. They just have so many words for love, for example, or time, that we in English only have one sort of debate on, so we can thank the Greeks. So I'll begin with a quote from Augustine from his Confessions, written around 400 CE. What is time? Who can give that a brief or easy answer? Who can even form a conception of it to be put into words? Yet, what do we mention more often or familiarly in our conversation than time? We must therefore know what we are talking about when we refer to it, or when we hear someone else doing so. But what exactly is that? I know what it is if no one asks, but if anyone does, then I cannot explain it. So one thing is for sure, whatever the ego thinks time is, whatever type of alphabetic spell it tries to cast in order to capture time, we can be sure that that's not it. Whatever time is, we should admit that we are mostly unconscious of it. In fact, it seems to me that there must be some kind of intimate connection between, or even an identity perhaps, between time and the Jungian notion of the unconscious. And I think archetypal cosmology, as I hope to show, substantiates that connection between time and the unconscious. So despite this unconscious depth and seeming ineffability of time, I am a philosopher, and there's nothing we love more than to try to F the ineffable. So, in the brief 15 minutes I have, indulge me, please. So as I said, I'm going to try to introduce you, with a little help from the ancient Greek language, to 3 different modalities of temporality, or maybe better said, I want to introduce you to 3 gods, each of them with a powerful hand in shaping our experience of time. Chronos, over here, associated with Saturn. Kairos, in the middle, associated with Uranus. And Aion, over here, associated with Neptune. In concrete experience, I think each of these modes is co-present and interwoven, so I'm only separating them here abstractly in order to help us get a better sense for the anatomy of time. But in doing so, we should be careful, because, as Wordsworth said, we murder to dissect. So we have to remember that what I'm doing here is an exercise in abstraction. Again, it's something that philosophers love to do. But that it's not like I'm trying to say one of these forms of time is better than the other, or that we should always try to live in chironic time and get rid of chronic time. They all coexist. They're all necessary. So before diving in, I just want to humbly ask, in Platonic fashion, for the blessing of the gods of time as we embark together on this journey into their meanings. So, gods of time, may you grant us entry into your mysteries. So let's start with a brief history of the idea of time. It doesn't really all begin with Plato, but let's start there for the sake of simplicity. In his dialogue, the Timaeus, Plato suggests that time is brought forth by the rhythmic motions, the dancing of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets upon the stage of 12 constellations. Through the cooperative and friendly circling of those archetypal beings, Plato said that eternity was granted entry into time. A sort of portal was opened up so that the eternal forms could be made visible, and so that time could manifest for we earthly beings. Time, in other words, was said by Plato to emerge from the harmonious or regular motion of the heavens, and this motion was regulated by mathematical harmonies. So Plato's ancient vision of a perfect cosmic order had it that the motion of the 7 known planetary spheres was in mathematical harmony with the 8th supraplanetary sphere of fixed constellations, and he suggested that the ratio of the orbits of the 7 planets with that 8th supraplanetary sphere of fixed stars added up to some kind of complete whole, a harmony, or a unity that has been called the Platonic or the Great Year, which now we know is the 26,000-year cycle, the precession of the equinoxes. And this highest of the heavenly spheres was known as a god named Aion. After Plato, there was Aristotle, who critiqued Plato's understanding of time as something produced by the motion of the heavenly bodies. Because Aristotle argued that time couldn't possibly be produced by motion, because motion itself is something that we measure using time. Motion can be fast or slow, Aristotle argued, but time always flows at the same rate. So for Aristotle, time became simply a way of measuring change. His conception of time then is more related to Chronos. It's chronic time, rather than the Aeonic time, the time of the god Aion that Plato was referring to. So with Aristotle, we start to see the beginning of a scientific view of time as a merely conventional form of measurement, rather than time as a kind of cosmic motion that we saw with Plato. Fast forward 2,000 years or so, 1,500 years or so to Galileo's view of the universe, which on the face of it is widely thought to be a complete rejection of Aristotle's understanding of physics, because Aristotle held a teleological view of time, a view of time as purposeful. So for example, when Aristotle would describe how an apple fell, he would say that the apple desired to fall in the way that it did, that it wanted to be closer to the earth because that was its natural home. Whereas for Galileo and the other early scientists, nothing is compelling the apple to fall. It's simply a blind happening that's working according to mechanical laws. So there's no teleology in Galileo. Galileo, like Newton and Descartes, rejected the idea of any sort of purposeful direction or meaningful arc to the course of time. For them, time became merely a function in a differential equation. So in a sense, then, even though the early scientists were rejecting Aristotle's view of purposeful teleological time, they also were just furthering Aristotle's sense of chronological time, of time as a measure of motion. So time again became t, a variable quantity that was used to calculate the precise velocity of bodies moving through space. And in the 20th century, we have Einstein, whose theory of relativity revealed how time and space are intimately related. Since, strange as it may seem, the faster you move, the greater your speed, the slower time appears to pass for you. Very strange, right? But still, time is not understood on its own qualitative phenomenological grounds, in its own terms. It becomes reduced to a linear and easily measurable and quantifiable function in a mathematical formula. So this is, again, the reduction of time to Chronos, which began with Aristotle but was certainly carried to new extremes by modern materialistic science. Now today, we know that things are quite a bit more chaotic than these earlier thinkers thought, including Plato. It seems to me that it's more accurate to say that we live in a chaosmos, not a perfect cosmos. This universe is more like an open, spiraling system than it is a closed circle or sphere. We know that the orbital periods of the planets are shifting ever so slightly as the years pass, and that the fixed stars are not actually fixed at all. You know, as Travis was saying in his talk, just like the musical scales are as perfect as they can be, but there are these anomalies at the edges. It's the same thing with the motions of the heavenly bodies. There's always a remainder. There's no perfect mathematical harmony to their motion. Things keep spiraling out of control and yet somehow managing to hang on to some semblance of order. So Our universe is very strange, stranger than the ancients and the modern scientists supposed. Measuring time turns out to be no easy matter. Even with merely chronological time, we run into a whole series of counterintuitive findings. Like, for example, I learned the other day that a day on Venus is longer than a year on Venus. Think about that. Time is very strange. We live in a universe wherein everything is spinning around everything else. So time is then not just a moving image of eternal perfection. Time is what happens, I would suggest, when divinity loses its balance and gets dizzy. But really there's nothing to worry about because there's nowhere to fall down in the infinite expanses of space. You just keep falling. So then let's dive into a deeper description of each of these gods or these modes of temporality. We'll start with Chronos to avoid angering the god Saturn. So Saturn, Chronos, is what I'll call chronic time. It's quantitative, it's homogeneous, it's secular time. As I've said, the modern age has entirely succumbed to the rule of chronic time. Chronic time is empty, it passes meaninglessly with no narrative arc. Chronic time is mere conventional measurement, a means of counting time so as to be able to use it as we see fit for our own private economic means or public political ends. It's something we spend, right? Time is money. Or it's something that we waste. Chronic time is a resource. You could also say that chronic time is laid out on a grid upon which unremarkable change can be plotted. It is time as materialistic physical science knows it, where the past is imagined to be no different ontologically from the present or the future, which is to say that there is no real creativity. There's no teleology again. The future is ontologically, in terms of what's real, just the same as the past. It's just a shifting around of what was already there. Chronic time is utterly indifferent to what happens. It's sort of a passive background rather than an active and interested participant. So with Chronos, the temporal situation is indifferent to us as subjects, as souls. Chronic time is ruled more by death anxiety because I would say it's the time of the ego. It's the way that the ego relates to time. So then Kairos, I think ruled by Uranus, is qualitative. It's heterogeneous, seasonal time. It's archetypally informed or textured time. Chironic time, I'm not talking about the asteroid, I'm talking about Kairos. Chironic time is full of potential such that it beckons us to participate in special moments that are more pregnant with others than others. Kairos reveals to us that there are certain times when the order of things or the cosmos or the world soul is attempting to persuade our human souls to participate in the unfolding events of the universe in a particular way, right? When the transits are aligned in certain ways, time is pregnant with certain possibilities more than others. And that's a reflection of chironic time, I would say. So it's as if there are certain times when a mood descends as though from heaven to help shape and characterize earthly events. Kairos, unlike Chronos, allows for a subject-situation correlation. So the situation of the alignments of the heavenly bodies creates a correlation with the subject, allowing for a field dynamic to take place. Chironic time also introduces novelty into the banality of linear chronic time. It is time as creative advance, as Alfred North Whitehead, one of my favorite philosophers, put it. Chronic time is timeliness. It's knowing how to act in the right moment. We might even refer to the planetary archetypes as kairoi, the plural for kairos. They're principles of timeliness. They're rulers of the different ways that eternity puts on the dress or the clothing of time. So when we ask, what time is it? We're asking for an answer in terms of chronic time. When we ask, what kind of time is it? We're asking for an answer in terms of Chironic time. So if Chronos is the time of the ego, then Kairos, I would say, is the time of the soul. Finally then, Aion, or Aionic time, is, I'm suggesting, ruled by Neptune. It's unbounded, sacred, or eternal time. Aion is time as a moving image of eternity. Time as an eternal circle that, when we contemplate it, grants us eternal life. Aion is time as experienced by the archetypes themselves, rather than, as with Chironic time, when the archetypes spill out of eternity to participate in our more mundane experience. So Aionic time is a sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Aionic time is our immeasurable movement of experiential intensification toward our unique but still cosmic destiny. So if Chronos is the time of the ego, and Kairos is the time of the soul, then Aion is the time of the self in the Jungian sense. So, I have 5 minutes? So then, minding time here means learning to participate again or to collaborate with the stars in the making of meaningful time. Without the Promethean aid of astrology, the texture of time would remain largely invisible to our mind's eye, largely inaudible to our heart's ear. Astrology makes time sensible, meaningful, and even moral. The archetypal astrological perspective teaches us that each of us carries our own time signature, and the transits. When we track our transits, that awareness makes us aware of our own, the way in which our own psychic rhythms line up with the planetary rhythms. So to continue that analogy, each of our beating hearts is like a microcosmic sun, which is to say that each of us is at the center of our own miniature universe. So time isn't something that just happens to us, it's something that we help to generate. And if we don't participate, its passage won't be meaningful. It's only chronic time, the time ruled by Chronos, that seems to happen to us, to come to us from the outside. While with Chironic time, we're called to participate. And with Aionic time, the difference between whether it's happening to us or we're doing it is kind of dissolved, right? There is no difference anymore. And one practical way forward that I would offer for our civilization is to begin to consider the difference between a merely conventional understanding of time, a conventional calendar system, and a cosmological calendar system. Ancient peoples tended to base their calendars on cosmological patterns and rhythms. So for one example, I'll offer, like, Egyptians would start their year. Their new year would be whenever the Nile flooded, right? So it's embedded in an ecological system of events. When the Roman Empire was at its height, the Gregorian calendar was put in place, which starts the new year on January 1st. It's not tied, it's close to the winter solstice, but it's not really tied to that. It's sort of arbitrary, and that calendar was introduced because mathematically it was more precise and regular, so we could control time better, right? Empire has a vested interest in doing that, but it disconnected us from the universe, from the actual patterns and rhythms of the cosmos. So I think instead of reducing time to a kind of cultural or political construct like that we really need to, with help from the archetypal astrological perspective, begin to reinvent a calendar system that can allow us to participate in the passage of time in a more than human way. And I'll leave you with that.